Hello and welcome back to the Federation for American Immigration Reform's Facebook Live. Today we are going to be talking about the New Way Forward Act, H.R. 5383, which is nothing short of a open borders proposal from members of the squad and some of the more far left in the House Democratic Caucus. I am Preston Huennekens. I am a government Relations Associate here at FAIR on the lobbying team. This is Spencer Raley. He is a Senior Research Associate, and he's done a lot of work on this bill. And we're going to talk you through why this is such a terrible proposal and why this has moved the needle on what some members of the Democratic Party think is acceptable for immigration reform in 2020. So Spencer, right off the bat, what's the first thing that hits you about this bill and makes you kind of question why this was introduced?
Well, Preston, this is really just one of probably the single most radical open borders proposal ever brought forth by anyone in Congress. It was authored by Rep. Chuy Gonzalez, and he has 44 co-sponsors. I mean, this isn't just like 2 or 3 people that are promoting this radical open borders piece of legislation. It's a relatively large part of Congress.
Right, that's almost a quarter of the Democratic House members. It's about 22%. And I think that really is indicative of how bad a lot of House members have gotten on this issue. This is something that even 5 years ago would not be sponsored by anyone reputable in the Democratic Party.
No, not at all. And it's getting a whole lot of traction in the media, on social media, largely in part because, as you mentioned, every single one of AOC's squad have not only signed on to this bill, they have been vocal proponents for it. This is what they've been wanting for a long time. So it's not something that just some radical member wrote and just set aside, no one's talking about it. It's gotten a little bit of attention.
Right, and this was a bill that was originally introduced in Congress in December 2019, but in January it was actually assigned to the Judiciary Committee, which, there are members of that committee that have co-sponsored this bill. Chief among them, Representative Jayapal from Washington. And this is something that can easily be marked up, especially after the impeachment trial is over. The Democratic House majority has indicated that they want to move bills like this through the House, and they want to put this in the Senate's lap and see what they do. So this is obviously, it can only get worse from here. But we're going to take you through this bill, explain to you why it's so bad, and hopefully you'll be a little bit more educated about it, going forward. So, right off the bat, one of the first things that we notice about this bill is that it shields illegal aliens from deportation, even if they have committed crimes of moral turpitude. So, tell us what that looks like if this was to become law.
Well, really what that would look like, first and I think foremost, is it essentially ends mandatory detention for aggravated felons. And that includes drug traffickers who would be shielded from deportation. It places a 5-year statute on limitations on deportation orders. So if you're ordered deported and you can hide, for a number of years, that'll be dismissed. It's statute of limitations. And it also grants all foreign immigration violators the right to bail, which means they can post a small bond and just disappear into the country.
And that, there's a lot to unpack in this opening thing. I think first let's talk about the 5-year statute of limitations on removals, because this would encompass a huge population of the illegal alien population in this country. If you're able to work and avoid police detection for 5 years, which you will know better than I do, but there are studies that have shown a lot of illegal immigrants have lived here for over 10 years, as long as they're not arrested for speeding or things like that. So that is a huge portion of this bill that I think a lot of people might be overlooking.
Yeah, absolutely. And honestly, if you just look at a lot of the research that's come out after the DACA bill was passed, you see that a lot of the people who are applying for DACA are in their late 20s. They've been in the United States for perhaps a decade or more. And that's only going to become more commonplace as you have issues with a growing number of sanctuary cities, which is making it a lot more difficult for ICE to do their job and work with local law enforcement to find immigration violators at the local level. So essentially what you're getting in this bill here is something that allows illegal aliens to remain in the country and to beat those deportation orders if they can hide for long enough, while on the side they're working with localities to make it even harder for ICE to find them in the first place. So they're kind of attacking ICE from two fronts here.
Right, and another important aspect of this is, shining the light, their kind of oversight on the detention aspects, because that is such an important part of effective immigration enforcement, is being able to hold illegal aliens who, from the moment they're detained to when we're able to remove them from the country. And we've seen for so long that, when they're given the opportunity, when they're given alternatives to detention, or when they're given the opportunity, to get out of detention and then wait for up to 2-3 years for their immigration court date, there's nothing stopping them from disappearing into the country. And so if you are targeting detention in this way, what are the results going to look like for, ICE and CBP trying to clamp down on this illegal population?
Well, really what you're seeing is an incentive for illegal aliens to not show up for court dates, first of all, because why show up for a court date if you can hide for a number of years and then not have to, then that the possibility of that court date goes away. So I would say that's the main thing you're seeing, is just an incentive for illegal aliens to avoid court dates, to disappear into the interior of the country, and just do their best to avoid immigration enforcement, so until they can reach that kind of year mark where they're essentially given some form of amnesty.
Right. So, we'll move on now to another part of the bill, and this is something that's actually been getting a lot of traction, not only from the Democratic caucus in the House, but also from, I would say, the majority of the Democratic presidential primary contestants right now. And that is the idea of decriminalizing border crossing. So that's two laws that would be changing. The first would be decriminalizing the initial, illegal entry into the country. The second would be decriminalizing people who have been removed and have subsequently re-entered the country illegally, which is a felony.
Yeah.
So taking away, making that a crime for those two, acts, what does that do, and does that handcuff ICE's ability, to crack down on people coming across the border?
Well, essentially what this does is it creates an open border society. And for how many years have we heard mass immigration proponents tell us, nobody's calling for open borders, you're being radical? Well, here it is. This is a call for open borders, for essentially saying, if you can get across the border somehow or another, doesn't matter if you've done it illegally in the past and been deported, but if you can get across the border some way, you're good to go, you're safe. And that's essentially what this bill's proposing.
And I really do think it is so telling that this has become such a talking point for the presidential candidates. It has now almost trickled down into becoming almost a mainstream view for the Democratic House caucus. And it's present in this bill. And a lot of them have been talking about this for months now.
Yeah.
And it's going to be very interesting to see if this continues after the Democratic primary is concluded. Is the party now moved to such a point where this becomes the standard of their platform?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're already seeing a number of Democrats that have, kind of settled on this point, and they're moving a step further in proposing state and federal benefits be offered to illegal aliens as well. So you can kind of already see a lot of open borders activists in Congress. They're looking ahead. They don't want to stop with this. This isn't kind of like that final, we're going to do this once and then we're going to enforce the law. They want to go beyond and start offering benefits as well.
Right. And speaking of benefits, this bill, one of probably the worst sections of it has to do with allowing illegal aliens who have already been deported. Sometimes they've been removed from the United States for years. This bill gives them the opportunity to challenge their removal orders that have already gone through court, and allows them at taxpayer expense to return to the United States, re-litigate their removal order, and potentially be given relief to remain in the U.S.
Yeah. And let me reiterate that. It's not just offering those that have been deported the chance to come back and hear their case again. In many cases, the United States, the taxpayers, would pay to fly these deported illegal aliens back to the United States to have their case reheard. It's absolutely absurd.
And it's absurd too, because let's say that they come back into the United States, they've re-litigated their case, and they're ordered removed again. What is going to keep them from leaving? They've just gotten a free plane trip here.
Yeah.
And because of the backlog now in immigration court is over 1 million cases. Adding in the over 4 million people who we have deported since 2002.
Yeah.
That is going to explode the backlog.
Yep.
And there are going to be millions of people trying to relitigate their removal orders, waiting in the United States. It could be years before they ever see an immigration judge, and yet they're allowed to remain in the United States.
And there are already a lot of proponents who push for giving these illegal aliens work authorization while they're here.
Right.
So not only are you inviting many millions of illegal aliens to come back and just rehear their court case, this isn't something they'll be taken care of in a week. It's a years-long process. No one's going to want to deport them once they go through that process, and they're going to have the opportunity to take jobs away from American citizens while that process goes on.
Right, and this is really a novel idea. This is something that, to my knowledge, has not been suggested by any serious politician in this way. We've seen, of course, the decriminalization at the border. That's something that's been talked about for months. General amnesties have been discussed for decades, but this is really shocking in setting the terms for what at least a quarter of the Democratic House caucus says they are comfortable with, which is paying to fly previously deported people back to the U.S. to try and to have a second chance.
Yeah, it's a blatant attempt to normalize the radical.
Right.
Just a few years ago, these were considered radical fringe opinions that no one in the Democratic Party even took seriously. But this is an attempt to normalize that. And if nothing else, they're going to say, okay, maybe that was too far, but if you just give us 3 of these 6 points, we'll have a moderate compromise, which, again, implementing any one of these points would be radical in and of itself and highly damaging to American citizens.
And to do it in one bill is just shocking. And I think it really does speak to the needle being moved on that side of the issue. They're no longer asking for an amnesty for the 700,000 active DACA recipients. This goes far beyond that. You're talking about at least, I think the number is 4.6 million people to return to the United States, try again, and live in the United States after they've been deported. You're talking about every illegal alien in the United States who can avoid detection for 5 years, which is millions of people can potentially do that. This is really shocking stuff, and that it's a testament that this many House Democrats support this and are willing to sign their name as a co-sponsor to legislation like this.
If you look at the total number of illegal aliens that currently reside in the United States, which is more than 13 million, and you look at how many are included in this bill and try to factor in how many they're going to try to sneak in the coming years, you could be looking at some form of amnesty for over 20 million people.
Right, and that even, I think you bring up a good point of, after some of these, we already have a crisis at our southern border. If any of the agreements that we've made with Mexico or with the Northern Triangle countries are taken away, we see that surge of asylum seekers return. If we do not have, and so this is with the laws that we already have, which we all know fall very short. Imagine if we decriminalized border crossings, brought back millions of people. I mean, there's no telling what that would do to immigration levels in this country.
It would be insane, and also it's highly unfair to those who have taken the time to try to migrate to the United States legally.
Right.
Because essentially what we're saying is that's not important. You don't have to do that anymore. And in addition to that, essentially what this has done is it's shown that these 44 House members care about the interests of illegal aliens over the interests of those who came here lawfully and United States citizens. Because it's going to create an immigration crisis. It's going to result in millions of people trying to come to the United States while, something like this is active. And, if we think we've seen a major issue with caravans up until now, only imagine what this would result in.
Right, and so we'll go through the final few points of this, and then we'll wrap up this discussion about this truly remarkably insane bill. One very interesting aspect is how ICE is able to bring cases against illegal aliens in this bill. It changes the parameters for which ICE is able to gather data about them to use against them in court. So it orders ICE to prove in court that illegal aliens are dangerous or a flight risk in order to detain them. If they can't prove that they're a flight risk or that they're dangerous, they have to let them go using, alternatives to detention, which usually just means an ankle monitor.
Or some sort of summons to
and a slip of paper that says, hey, please show up to court. But in this bill, in court, they cannot use an alien's criminal history as evidence that they are dangerous. So how would ICE prove that they're dangerous?
It essentially makes it very difficult, if not impossible. You could not look at an arrest record and say, oh, we caught you trying to smuggle drugs across the border, therefore we see you as a flight risk. Or you've been deported before and you've been caught illegally re-entering the country. It essentially makes ICE, as you mentioned, hand them a slip of paper and say, please show up to court. Don't disappear into the country. It just keeps them from being able to do their job and minimizes the likelihood of deportation, which is honestly the one of the root is what they're trying to do with this bill.
Right, and this goes even beyond having a formal criminal record. I mean, in my head, I'm thinking ICE can currently, for instance, use, restrict, if a alien has battered his partner or spouse and has beaten him or her, they're able to use, even if it didn't result in a criminal conviction, they're able to use, restraining orders or civil penalties, that kind of thing, as evidence that they're a dangerous person or a violent person.
Yeah.
That would obviously, under this bar, not be acceptable.
And it's problematic as well because you're essentially putting more people at risk by just allowing these dangerous or even previously criminal illegal aliens to just walk free on the streets again with some kind of summons. Whereas the status quo now, you could detain them, make sure that those who are at risk are safe, and make sure that this illegal alien and potentially criminal illegal alien isn't going to disappear into the country once you give them that summons and let them go.
Right, and criminality is one of the first things that we look at when, adjudicating these cases. So it's going to be very difficult for an immigration judge to have to ignore an alien's possibly extensive criminal history when determining if they're able to get relief and stay in the country or to remove them. It seems that there's going to be very few ways that ICE could successfully argue in front of an immigration judge, hey, this person needs to go.
Yeah, and a lot of the criteria that you described were actually put in place during the Obama administration. So what this bill does is it takes the lax immigration policies of the Obama administration and goes beyond that. It's not an act of, oh, we don't like what's happened since Trump has taken office, so we're trying to mitigate that. It's going more radical than we've ever seen before.
Wow. And finally, one of the final acts in the bill is that it allows immigration judges the power to nullify a deportation order. So walk us through this, because this would radically change how the immigration courts work now. And in some ways, it would empower activist immigration judges to nullify the removal orders that have potentially been, handed down by another immigration judge. I mean, how does this make sense at all?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. It offers an avenue for activist judges who don't truly care about the rule of law as it's written to just nullify a deportation order. So if you, for example, get this bill passed and then get someone in power who is radically open borders as well, of course, they're going to try to pack the immigration courts with activist judges. And this gives them that opportunity, just a handful of judges, to start nullifying a wide breadth of deportation orders that already exist.
And this is a strategy that, President Trump's opponents particularly have used to stop many of his immigration actions from being put in place. We've seen this with the circuit courts across the country putting holds on some of his actions. This, it seems, is following that same strategy where you would have a handful, not anywhere close to the majority, but a handful of immigration judges able to issue and overturn the decisions of their fellow immigration judges who have ordered illegal aliens removed from the country.
Yeah, it's a strategy that most recently was used with the public charge rule. You saw just here in recent weeks, the Supreme Court ruled that injunction, which an activist judge placed on the changes to the public charge rule made by President Trump's administration, those were removed. And in his concurring opinion, Justice Gorsuch goes right at those activist judges, says this is not normal, this is not right, it's not what was intended for a judge clean across the country to say, hey, I don't like that, so I'm going to put a nationwide injunction on this and hope that some other judge or, run out the clock until Trump is out of office and we can nullify this once and for all. It's just kind of an extension of that strategy to the immigration courts, where one judge says, hey, I don't like the ruling that another judge made, therefore I'm just going to block it or I'm going to remove that. And if nothing else, create chaos and minimize the chance that a illegal alien is actually deported.
Right, and it just follows, essentially just what they've had the most success with. And trying to put that into law is very indicative of their thinking and their strategy in trying to stop, the agenda of President Trump, who this has been one of his premier issues.
Yeah.
And this really is a bill that I don't think we would have seen had President Trump not been the occupant of the White House.
No,
because
absolutely
they are so rabidly opposed to any kind of action on immigration enforcement that this is almost their, they're finally showing their hand at what they truly want to see legislatively. And so, Spencer, wrapping up, do you have any final notes on this bill? Anything that you think our viewers should know about or should follow up with?
Well, I think it's just important to, again, see that the authors of this bill care more about illegal aliens than their own constituents, U.S. citizens. So it's important that, we hold them accountable, that we speak out against bills like this, let them know that the American public still respects the rule of law and doesn't ever want to see something like this even written, much less brought up for a vote.
Right, right. Well, Spencer, thank you for taking us through this bill. I hope that our viewers at home have enjoyed this segment on the new way New Way Forward Act. This is the Federation for American Immigration Reform Facebook Live. You can also find us on Twitter, on Instagram, and of course at our website, www.fairus.org. Again, I'm Preston Huennekens. This is Spencer Raley. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.